Welcome to Shopper Matters, a podcast brought to you by the Independent Grocers Alliance. And now your host, Michael La Kier.
Hello and welcome to Shopper Matters, the podcast where we explore the trends, behaviors, and retail realities shaping how people shop today. I'm your host, Michael La Kier, the Vice President of Brand Development at the Independent Grocers Alliance. IGA is the largest global network of independently owned and operated grocery stores in the world. Here in the U.S., our 3,000 plus stores are fixtures of their local communities, committed to bringing the freshest and best products possible to our shoppers. Our brand promise is local equals fresh. This isn't really meant to be an ad for IGA, but rather a way of sharing that we know the importance of fresh items, especially produce, and what that means to shoppers. Today, we're diving into one of the most recognizable items in produce, watermelon. At first glance, watermelon might seem pretty simple. It's an iconic, highly seasonal item in shoppers' minds and super easy to associate with summer. But the real reality is that watermelon is much bigger than that. It sits at the intersection of value, freshness, versatility, family occasions, impulse, and celebration. And for retailers, framing the simple melon in terms of what it means to shoppers creates significantly more opportunities than many may realize. So joining me today is Julimar Rosado, Director of Retail and International Marketing at the Watermelon Board. Today we'll talk about how shopper behavior around watermelon is evolving, where the category can grow, and what retailers can do to turn a familiar item into a bigger driver of trips, baskets, and loyalty. Julimar, welcome to Shopper Matters.
Hi, Michael. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. So today we'll talk about watermelon and shopper behavior, and we'll do that in a minute. But first, it'd be great for you to introduce yourself and your background so our listeners can learn more about you and where you're coming from.
Well, as you said, I'm the Director of Retail and International Marketing at the National Watermelon Promotion Board. I've been with the promotion board since 2010. And I've been working in retail for a decade. I do not have an ag background. My background is mostly in marketing and advertising communications. So it's always really fun to promote a product that's healthy and delicious for, consumers at large.
Awesome. And we've had some other guests on the program that have made that shift from CPG and consumer brands into more ag or produce. And it's always interesting to get those learnings and understand what's similar and what's different about products when you're talking about something maybe that's in a bottle or a box versus something that has its own container, as the case with watermelon.
I mean, yeah, it's interesting because I actually come from a healthcare background. So my background is interesting in the sense that food-wise, I did not come from a food background at all. It was just marketing. I was in healthcare. I grew up around healthcare. So it was really interesting to shift from kind of that side of healthcare to come into, food that's good for consumers and healthy. So I do love this shift and agriculture in general.
Awesome. Well, I was going to say, you said it well, that you made a shift from healthcare to healthy, just a different aspect and more perhaps more product related, definitely more delicious.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So let's start with perhaps why watermelon matters more than people think. It's one of those categories that I think everyone knows. Sometimes, though, familiar categories can get underutilized or strategized, if you will. They're loved, but not always fully developed. So when you look at the watermelon category today, what do you think retailers still underestimate about it?
I mean, I think that they often underestimate the sheer, volume potential. It's got massive growth outside of those traditional summer windows. And it can be, a significant what's the right word, driver of channel grocery spend. So our categories purchases reached about $3.2 billion. So it has, it can be a powerhouse category rather than, I guess, what you would consider a passive commodity.
So let's talk about seasonality. Obviously, watermelon is very closely associated with summer, but we've seen the Watermelon Board do some very unique things in terms of perhaps counter seasonality programming. What's driving that, and do you have any stories in terms of how retailers can better activate?
I mean, love this. So it is driven by the fact that about a third of the watermelon consumed, at least domestically, is imported. So we do, at the Watermelon Board, we are a year-round product, and we view watermelon as a year-round product. Once you get out of summer, you still need something healthy and delicious to eat throughout the year. And especially in the fall time when sports get back and school gets back, there's obviously opportunities for you to give snacks on snack duty to your kids. But also, it is good seasonally. We always sometimes will say, save a pumpkin, carve a watermelon. There's tons of carvings online that you can make a jack-o'-melon. And there's a lot of opportunities to do things in the fall and winter where watermelon is still very relevant. I remember a few years back when I was doing some tours, we stopped by a store that had watermelon out in the middle of December. And at the time I was like, wow, that's so exciting. And we talked to the person in charge there, like, oh, wow, people are buying watermelon. And he said, and I'll never forget, if I put it out, they buy it. So I say that to everyone else. If you put it out, they will buy it. I stand by this. I think it's so important for sure.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where oftentimes it's a self-fulfilling prophecy in terms of if you promote it, guess what's going to happen? It'll sell. If you don't promote it, guess what'll happen? It won't sell because you're not giving people that opportunity.
That's right. And, there are also things in the winter time, even, you've got Heart Month in February, and watermelon is, heart check certified. You know what I mean? It's good for your cardiovascular health. I think there are lots of opportunities where watermelon can come into play, even with other produce items, where you can still be part of the balanced diet, right? In January, everyone's like, new year, new me. That's a really good place for watermelon as well. Just kind of keeping up with all of those different themes that go on throughout the year.
Yeah, it sounds like there's a lot of opportunity, and it would behoove retailers not to just focus in on summer, despite the fact that right now it is National Watermelon Month in July. Maybe
Yes.
Maybe in 2027 move that to like October or November. Who knows? Maybe.
And I'll try. I'll try.
I mean,
It's so funny. Watermelon Month is in July, but for some reason, the internet decided that National Watermelon Day is August 3rd. So
there's one extra day.
Exactly. I get one extra day. That's exactly right.
I think oftentimes produce, watermelon for sure, but other products, we kind of box ourselves into a certain way of thinking, which means that, hey, if we don't promote it outside the regular season, guess what happens? It doesn't move, it doesn't get promoted, it doesn't do what we think it can do, and means that we're perhaps keeping a powerhouse down, which is not a good thing. So what do you think makes, obviously it's summer here in Atlanta. I just looked at the weather earlier and it was feeling like 100 degrees beyond the heat, and how refreshing and delicious and sweet watermelon is. What makes watermelon especially relevant to how shoppers are thinking about, more so about value and fresh right now versus seasonal?
Right. So it's really interesting because it is hot. It's hot where I am too. I'm in Florida. And July is National Watermelon Month. So we are in its peak right now. But one thing is that typically watermelon consistently ranks as a front runner for lowest cost per serving among all fresh fruits. So it does make it, uniquely positioned to appeal to that inflation wary, budget conscious consumers that are seeking that high volume and healthy options. And I think really out of everything, that the value component of watermelon per serving is probably what shoppers are thinking about as far as, cost conscious folks.
Yeah, I think definitely in today's environment, cost plays a significant role, and it's kind of that value equation. Delicious, healthy, tastes good, lower cost. Definitely plays a role in it. Let's talk about where the next phase of growth perhaps comes from. We talked about July being National Watermelon Month, summer being a huge time for watermelon, but a lot of categories, especially in the produce section, are always trying to win new shoppers. But in watermelon, like you talk about high household penetration, the story may be as much about how often people buy and how they use it, more so than more users. So when a category has broad household reach already, the next question becomes, where does that incremental growth come from? So where do you see the biggest growth opportunities now?
Interestingly enough, we recently did some research to address this. And the biggest opportunity lies in increasing the shopping frequency. So existing households, if they make just one additional watermelon purchase trip per year, it would inject over $500 million into the whole category. So it's getting those shoppers to buy one more watermelon, one more shopping trip, one more, just one. So that's really where kind of the opportunity lies as far as how do we grow those opportunities. That was research that was conducted last year when we were looking to see what those growth strategies would be with watermelon.
So more occasions and frequency as opposed to amount, or getting someone to buy two at one time or things like that. Just more often and included in more trips.
Yeah, basically kind of leaning into those loyal watermelon buyers and seeing if they can just buy one more.
Yeah, makes sense. So you talk about loyal watermelon shoppers as a key target audience. Are there shopper segments or specific household types that are becoming increasingly important to the category's future?
Yeah. So in the study that we did conduct, the buyers were segmented by annual spend. So even though the heavy shopper segment accounted for about 25% of those watermelon households, they were the ones that drove a disproportionate amount of the total category purchase dollars. So what that means is retaining and engaging that specific core group is important for sustained growth. So yes, we do want to get those new shoppers in. We want to get new people in, but we also want to pay attention to the people that are already buying.
There specific within that research, specific things that you learned about the differences between light, medium, and more frequent watermelon shoppers. Don't want to say heavy shoppers.
Yeah, I mean, I think, as far as I think it's interesting just because that we take all of these tools and we figure out what strategy might be for promoting more watermelon. And sometimes I don't know how to say this correctly, but sometimes you kind of forget about the people that are already buying watermelon because you're so ingrained in trying to get those, new people injected into the category. But I think that because the heavy shopper segment, even though it's a smaller segment, it did 63% of total category purchase dollars came from them. So wow. I do think that making sure to continue engaging and seeing how we can get those repeat purchases is important.
And are you seeing differences in terms of like geography, ethnicity that are driving some of those, like that are unique to those heavy buyers, or is it across the board?
Actually, the growth as far as what we're seeing is growing is those smaller, higher income, younger, which would be your Gen Z and millennials, and the more diverse households. So trying to cultivate engagement with those younger demographics, I guess that would be what you're 18 to 34, right? Mm-hmm. Who utilize watermelon for culinary innovation. That is essential for the category health long term, just because the Gen Z and millennials, they're a little bit more experimental. They see trends on social media and want to try them. So getting them engaged as far as a growth would be, I think that would be kind of the way to go when it comes to that stuff.
Yeah, so the usage occasions, super important. What's the role then of, I guess, inspiration? You mentioned very digitally engaged. We've seen cottage cheese go crazy because of TikTok and stuff like that. What's the role going forward of digital engagement and inspiration for the category?
I mean, I think it's really interesting as far as digital. I think people also need to get an education on selection as well as cutting, like kind of having that culinary confidence to handle the product is important. And so educating not just consumers, but also retailers on selection, on cutting, because if retailers are educated on how to handle watermelon and what to do with watermelon, then they can educate their customers on how to do that. And I do think that, I know TikTok's very popular. Our, consumer communications team, YouTube Shorts. I don't know if you knew that research suggests that a lot of people watch YouTube Shorts on television. Did you know that? I recently learned that.
I have a 28-year-old son who has introduced me to YouTube Shorts via the television. So it's interesting. We went on vacation recently and watched a whole bunch of stuff. And I'm like, oh, I hadn't really thought about that before. So I'm about maybe a month ahead of others then.
There you go. Yeah, that's good. No, I mean, I do think that sometimes, with watermelon, there are so many things you can do with watermelon and so many culinary applications. And sometimes you do need to scale it back and just keep it simple. And, tasting is believing with watermelon. I've always said that. I think it's so important to, I don't know how to do that digitally as far as letting someone know how delicious watermelon is. But I do think that, showcasing the product in a way that is juicy and refreshing will entice that customer to go into the store and buy it.
Yeah, I think appetite appeal is super important, regardless of, you said preparation or whatever. It's all about, the look, and you can't really get the smell or the taste via digital yet. Maybe they're still working on that. But for those of you, yeah, why not? So for those of you listening and not watching, behind Julimar is some delicious and very appetite-inducing photos of watermelon. So you talked about varieties, not just sort of merchandising. My wife is a big fan of. We have a local restaurant here who, after Memorial Day, has a watermelon salad with some feta and basil with both red and yellow watermelon. Beyond yellow, is there an up-and-coming varietal of watermelon that we should be aware of that we can learn about here first?
I do know that yellow watermelon is becoming a little bit more popular and more readily available, whereas, when I first started at the board, it was more of a novelty item. But now I do see it in grocery stores quite a bit. There are so many varieties of watermelon. I feel like probably about 200 varieties commercially.
Wow.
But most of them are red for the most part. I think the reason it's yellow is because it has like more beta carotene, whereas like red watermelon has lycopene. That's what makes it red. But then the yellow watermelon has more beta carotene, is what I understand. That's what makes it yellow.
You got to mix them for better health then.
Apparently so.
Nice. Well, as we've talked about shopper behavior a little bit, we know growth doesn't just come from availability. It comes from understanding what people want the products, whether it's watermelon or something else, to do for them. So when people buy watermelon, as we talked about, typically they're not just buying produce. They're buying for refreshment. We talked about value already, convenience, family moments, and solutions for a variety of occasions. So
Yes.
Is watermelon primarily a value play, a health play, a celebration play, or all of the above?
Okay, I'm not trying to be a cop out, but it is all of the above for sure. I think that it satisfied that value play via the low cost per serving that we talked about earlier. And then the health play is through really the number one is hydration, right? It's 92% water. So, but there are also other nutrients to watermelon. And as far as an emotional celebration play, we surveyed people a few years back and 100% of consumers reported that watermelon makes them feel happy. That's like the biggest thing. So I do think as far as a celebration play, watermelon makes people happy. So I think it is all of the above for sure.
Awesome. So as we talk about happy, I've seen we talked TikTok earlier, I've seen on social media, smiley face watermelons and stuff like that. So happy makes a difference, but that's cut watermelon. Do people think about whole versus cut differently? I feel like shoppers do evaluate whole and cut based on kind of what they think is the most of value. So, whole watermelon is like budget friendly volume. You can get so much of it. Whereas I feel like cut watermelon addresses that immediate convenience factor, the convenience snacking, that immediate craving. If you're really wanting a watermelon, but you don't want to get in there and cut it up and you just want to eat it, then you just buy a cut watermelon, That's what I think. So I think that makes sense. So we talked a little bit about that emotional piece and happiness, certainly important. In produce, though, we find oftentimes health gets attention, but emotion drives action. And so many other categories and folks that we've talked to have recognized the importance of health, but it's rarely enough on its own to drive the growth. So we know that watermelon, as we talked about, checks the boxes for freshness, hydration, health, but that enjoyment piece, what do you see a difference in terms of how that drives demand and what that looks like?
It's really interesting because I think in a way now, whereas before when people thought about, health, they only thought about what does an item check a box for? Like, is it fiber? Is it potassium? Is it vitamins? Is it this? Whereas now, the trend is more whole body wellness. So that includes mental and physical, right? So I do think that, enjoyment is a primary driver of watermelon sales so that, the positive emotional associations of watermelon, encourage that repeat purchase, far more effectively than someone that says, hey, this is 92% water, in this sense. And especially because early on, everybody thought watermelon was just a sugar snack, like a healthier version of sugar. Sometimes I still, go to events and people are like, oh, I didn't know that watermelon had this. Not so much anymore, but early on. And we're like, no, it's actually really good for you. But they think about eating with their kids or, just kind of those family memories. So I think that it does, even though watermelon is healthy, there is that nostalgia for it as far as, taking a bite and remembering a memory. It kind of invokes a memory always, I think.
Yeah, I think there's definitely an emotional connection to it, which, some of the best brands in the world strive for the emotional connection that watermelon has. My background at Coca-Cola, there's a ton of emotional connections and history behind the brand that are perhaps even more important than the product itself. So having that emotional connection where you're fun, craveable, really helps make it more relevant for real life. So let's talk a little bit about perhaps some of those missed occasions that retailers aren't thinking about. So how do you take that fun, healthy hydration, craveability, and memory, bringing it to other usage occasions or other times throughout the year? What are some suggestions that you have for those in retailer?
Well, it's like I said before, I'm a fan of tasting is believing. And I do think that integrating any kind of cross promotions you can do can ignite that flavor excitement. So, even if you mentioned earlier you had watermelon with salad, feta, mint, little bit of basil, whatever it is, right? I think that highlighting watermelon's versatility as far as applications and recipes, and even, other products like yogurt, other products that you can incorporate in there. I do think that elevates all products involved as far as like, oh, you can use a yogurt or a salad or a dressing. And I do feel even just something as simple as a seasoning helps to showcase that watermelon is really good with everything, I guess would be the right way to put that. But I do think that integrating, multiple products to showcase all of them working together elevates everyone.
Gotcha. So let's
if that makes sense.
Oh, absolutely it does. I want to talk in a minute about what works at retail, given that line of questioning, but you did talk about seasoning. So let's talk about perhaps one of the biggest controversies in the category.
Oh boy.
Salting watermelon. So we have a close friend who's a big fan of salting watermelon. Explain that to me, or explain that to our listeners, perhaps who aren't as close to perhaps the salted watermelon trend.
It's interesting. There have been trends here and there. Salting watermelon has been around for a really long time. Some people say that if you salt a watermelon, it actually tastes sweeter because it does bring out more of the sweetness. Some people are very anti-salt. I am on either camp. I think that it tastes good either way. I can kind of see where salted watermelon does bring out more of the sweetness. It seems to be more of like a Southern trend as far as, people that salt their watermelon. Do you salt your watermelon?
I don't, but the last time we were with friends, there was big controversy between those of us from the South and some who did salt it versus those from the North who are like, what are you doing? And what are you talking about?
Yeah. I mean, I think, the 24/7, 365 watermelon marketer that I am, I don't care what you do with it as long as you're eating it.
And buying it.
And buying it, both, all of the above. But I do think it's really interesting because I know there was a trend a couple years back of like watermelon and like mustard, I want to say. It was like yellow mustard. I think it just depends on what your palate is, right? Like some people need a little bit more salt. But I guess in a way, in thinking about it now, you've just sparked something. Salted watermelon in a way is kind of like a electrolyte, replenishment, right? Because you need salt when you're doing that. So it's almost like you're taking a chunk of, a sports recovery drink, but natural. That's what I'm thinking in my mind, when you do the salt. I don't necessarily think that's why people are doing it, but it could be. that could be my spin, you know?
There you go. Well, hey, it's always one of those things of what's the rationale behind something, and then how do you lean into it? So, maybe
Right.
salted watermelon is the next generation of recovery beverages. Who knows?
Maybe. There you go. Look at that.
Yeah,
We just made something up right here.
there you go. So we talked.
I love
We did
it.
talk about the versatility of watermelon. So here we go.
That's right.
So
Exactly right.
let's keep talking about merchandising and maybe a little bit more traditional merchandising and get actionable. We talked about some of the opportunities for cross merchandising, but I guess what separates kind of a basic watermelon display from one that truly inspires shoppers? I know you have a annual watermelon display contest. What really inspires shoppers and what makes a difference when it comes to retail?
I do think it's really interesting as far as like what works at retail. So, one thing that I will say is high visibility bin displays do a lot. And even secondary locations. I know that some stores are kind of a clean floor, so they don't do a lot of point of sale materials or anything like that. But even if you have any kind of educational material, sometimes one of those purchase barriers with watermelon is selection because people get a little intimidated by a big bin of watermelon. And if they don't have their own methods of selection, they're like, I don't know. I do think that selection tips is important, even if it's like a small sign that gives you, we have a look, lift, turn kind of method here at the Watermelon Board. So I do think that having those bin displays is important. And I do think also in store, regularly repositioning and rotating the watermelon, making sure that there aren't any damaged, making sure that they're easy to reach, because if they're easy to reach, they're easy to sell, right?
Yeah. So let's talk about some selection tips.
Okay.
You mentioned a little mnemonic there that might be helpful for
Yes.
those in the industry and those who just love watermelon, and walk us through how to select the best watermelon possible.
So our big three is look, lift, turn. So you want to look at the watermelon. You want to make sure that it doesn't have any bruising or open dense gashes. Obviously, scratches are okay because they are grown outside. It happens. You want to lift it up. It should be heavy for its size. It's 92% water. And then you want to turn it over, and you can't see any in the picture I'm showing for people that cannot see. There is no ground spot, but you want to look for a ground spot or a field spot. It's where it sat on the ground and ripened in the sun. And I always say it should be a buttery yellow color, a creamy yellow. Sometimes if it's, you can still use it, but sometimes if it's too bright of a yellow, you might need to blend it and make it into juice, is what I'll say, But yeah, look, lift, turn. I don't know anything about tapping or thumping because I feel like all of that is subjective. But that's what we use, and that's what's worked for me personally.
That's awesome. Yeah, we have a friend who talks about something about the stripes and fingers, but I've
Yeah.
always perhaps followed look, lift, turn without knowing it. The whole notion of heavier than you would think it is has always steered me right for the most part. So.
Well, and speaking of varieties earlier, some watermelon varieties don't have stripes anymore. So you can't really
my
look at
friend
the
would not know
stripes,
how to buy
right?
that one.
Yeah, exactly. You got to look, lift, turn.
Yeah, nice. So one of the big themes across retail today is that category growth is not driven only at the point of transaction. Let's go back to the notion of influenced at that point of inspiration. So sometimes that point of inspiration can be cut watermelon and it's super red and juicy, and I'm gonna be inspired, make a decision, and buy all at once. Sometimes it's, hey, I was at a party and that recipe was great, and then somehow I got reminded of it. How has that shopper journey for Watermelon evolved across all those touch points, both in-store and digital?
Well, I mean, the pre-shop journey has heavily shifted online. So, while obviously the physical transactions still dominate in store, especially for Watermelon, digital channels, as you said, kind of dictate the inspiration, right? And that inspiration phase that heavily influences what gets added to those carts, right? And physical lists. I still do think that the pre-shop journey has heavily shifted online. I think it's important for retailers to acknowledge that. They do get a lot of inspiration and recipe ideas from your social media, from viral recipes, from, even something as simple as, those targeted ads that you see online. It happens so regularly that sometimes you don't even realize that that's what's happening to you. You'll be like, oh, I saw that somewhere. And then you're in the store and you're like, I'm going to get this. So I think it's important and it's also important for retailers to lean into anything that might be viral that could work in their stores as well.
Yeah.
Paying attention to social trends is very important, for sure.
Paying attention to trends is important. You mentioned earlier some of the research that you've done. Is there one shopper insight from the research that you've done that retailers should be paying more attention to?
Our household penetration went up to about 75%, which was, at least about a point more than it was the last time we did that. So I do think that there is also a rapid growth in club channel stores, which I thought was really interesting when it came to Watermelon. But as far as the one shopper insight from our latest research that we should be paying more attention to is really that the category did welcome 7 million new purchasing households. So there is a little bit new in recent years. So that did help push our market penetration. So I do think there are opportunities to get that, what we talked about earlier, that repeat purchase or one more visit.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you talked earlier about younger shoppers, more diverse shoppers, and you just mentioned the fact that there's a ton of new households coming in, even though you have very high household penetration. So what should retailers understand or perhaps take away from our conversation as to the difference between where Watermelon sells today and where future growth may come from? And are there actions they should be taking now to sort of capture that future growth?
I mean, I do think that traditional grocery remains the volume leader, but I think maybe incremental growth if there is an opportunity for digital e-commerce channels and younger, diverse consumer segments leaning into those younger, high-income, diverse households, I think is really where the future of the category will be, for sure.
Makes sense. So as we wrap up our conversation today, I want to shift a little bit from, we just talked about action, but keep going down that path.
Okay.
And I probably know the question now that we're in the dead of summer in July. So if a retailer's listening right now and wanted to do one thing differently with Watermelon, I typically say over the next 90 days, but I have a feeling based on our conversation, it might even go beyond the next 90 days. What's one thing they should be doing differently, maybe between now and the end of the year with Watermelon?
Differently. I will say, I do think retailers do a really good job with merchandising Watermelon. I want to give props where props is due. But I do think that they need to do a little bit more recipe inspiration and selection education. That's really the biggest thing. that's where I would go. I think educating consumers in store where they're already in there. I know that now people are being braver about trying recipes, especially those younger audiences. So if there is a way to inspire someone to try a recipe with watermelon that might not be traditional, but could be trending, I do think that showcasing the versatility of watermelon in a way, anyway, even if you're sharing a recipe on your channel online, or even if you're putting a sign in the store, I do think that education is so important. I'm trying to think of what else to say, but I honestly, I think selection education and recipe inspiration are the two big things that consumers would like to see in store, for sure.
Oh, that's great, because very interesting in terms of driving. It sounds like snacking's always been there, but it sounds like you're driving into how do we get into new occasions? How do we become perhaps more part of mealtime or different occasions? Or you mentioned with yogurt, breakfast, things like that. So diversifying occasions and meeting different need states is a huge opportunity for retailers.
I think that also, with whole watermelon, it is such a good low cost per serving. But if we want, the reason I mention recipe inspiration is because sometimes what happens is people get this whole watermelon, but then they're like, I don't know what to do with this. Like, I'll eat it cut, I'll eat it, I'll juice it, I'll blend it, but there's so much more you can do so that you can incorporate it into every meal occasion, breakfast, lunch, dinner, and it is great for snack duty if you have snack duty, for your sports and things like that. Of course, don't miss snack duty. But I'm just saying that you can use it in different applications that can be for every meal occasion. And I think inspiring consumers to, decide to be brave about buying that whole watermelon and then using it a bunch of different ways, I think is inspiring, and maybe they'll go back and buy another one,
Awesome. So this was a terrific conversation, Julimar. I appreciate it. Where can listeners go to find more retail tools, ideas, and as we just talked about, inspiration from the National Watermelon Board?
I mean, first of all, watermelon.org. That's your go-to resource for watermelon. That's where you need to go. We have a retailer section on that website that has all your watermelon 101 at retail, if you'd like. So, but if you go to watermelon.org, you will find everything that you need to know about watermelon.
No, that's great. So I think what stood out for me from our conversation today is that, while watermelon is familiar, that doesn't mean by any means that the opportunity is fully developed. And probably the real lesson here is that sometimes growth doesn't come from chasing the next new thing. Sometimes it comes from rethinking a category shoppers already know and love, and perhaps doing a better job of connecting it to more occasions, stronger merchandising, as you mentioned, clearer value and inspiration. And while that's definitely true for watermelon, it's probably true for a lot of categories out there. So,
for
Julimar,
sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
Thank you again for joining us, and congratulations, and enjoy the rest of National Watermelon Month.
Thank you so much.
For our listeners and viewers out there, thank you for joining us. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it, subscribe, and join us next time as we continue to explore the ideas, trends, and shopper truths shaping the future of retail. Again, I'm Michael La Kier, and thanks for joining Shopper Matters.
Thanks for joining the Shopper Matters podcast. If you liked this episode, please subscribe so you'll automatically receive new episodes as they are released.